Hi there, my name is Julie Brar. I'm a certified health coach and nutritionist, but today I'm here to speak with you about my own personal journey through grief. So in September of 2012, I lost my husband. He died of a heart attack on September 20th, and I came home and I found him. So it was quite a shock. I don't get to talk about him very often anymore, so I wanted to share a couple of pictures of him. So this is him when he used to run. His name was Kim. He was a triathlete for many years. And this is him coming out of the water. Yeah. So Kim was very active his entire life. He was a triathlete. He was quite motivated to exercise. And for someone like him, he looked really healthy and fit. Like, he was lean, he exercised, he ate properly. He did all the things that you were supposed to do. And unfortunately, when it comes to heart disease is about 80% preventable. And so sometimes if someone has a strong genetic predisposition to it, it doesn't matter so much about lifestyle necessarily. They just unfortunately don't get to live out a long life. And so in Kim's case, he was 51 years old when he passed away. Of course, for me, it was very, very traumatizing to come home and find him that way. I did call the paramedics, and to this day, very grateful for how hard they tried to resuscitate him. And of course, it was a terrible shock for his mom, his brother, his sister. And that's the thing about losing. I'm going to try and get through this without crying. But when we lose someone we love, it's a big void in our life. And especially the closer you are to that person, the harder it is. And so for me, we had been together for 11 years at that point. And we were talking about starting a family, buying a home, all of these things that we had planned and hoped for our future. And with his passing, of course, everything was cut short. And at the time, I was acting full-time, more sort of pursuing a career in the arts. And I just finished a recurring role on a TV series and was producing a play and writing a play. And so I was kind of pretty focused on being creative. But the sort of the mixed blessing of his passing is that because of what I did for work, I was actually able to take some time off and really honor my journey through grief. I did find, though, that because of what happened to him, because it was such a shock to my system, that it actually took me a lot longer to recover physically. So it took me, I would say, a good 3 to 4 months before I even came out of the state of shock. Like, I just really felt disconnected in my body. Like, I couldn't ground myself at all. I just felt really like I don't even know how to describe it, but I just felt like I wasn't even in my body. I felt like I was kind of having this out of body experience. And of course, the other thing that was very hard was that my mind just kept bouncing around from thinking about him and all of the things that we did and all the places we traveled and in the past, and then also thinking about all the things that we had planned for the future that were never going to happen. And so it was a really, really difficult time. I did, thankfully, in my time with Kim and our relationship together, I had very much also gotten on a path of yoga and meditation, and I had those kinds of tools in my toolbox. And so I didn't feel physically like I could do a yoga practice because my body was in such a bad state. But I did turn to meditation. And after about 4 months, I went to do 10 days of silent meditation. And as hard as it was to really sit and breathe through all of my thoughts, it actually allowed a lot of the emotions to come up through my body and to clear out. And I finally started to sleep more. I finally started to have like moments in my day where I felt a little bit calm. So he passed away in September, and this meditation retreat I did in January. And so there were a lot of tools that I employed to help myself move through this. I spent time with, friends that were empathetic and sympathetic and could hold space for me, because that's the other thing is, when you lose someone you love, not everybody understands and can empathize and can hold space. And I found that I got very, very sensitive to people's energies. And so certain friends I spent more time with. I also spent a lot of time having baths. Something about the water just really comforted me. After I was able to finally start sleeping through the night, I did sleep a lot to just help my body to physically recover. And there were other things that I used as well. Like I talked to a therapist, I used massage therapy, I had an osteopath that I worked with as well. Kim and I lived in Vancouver for quite a few years, and we had actually just recently moved back to Toronto. And so I actually ended up going to the West Coast 3 times in the year after he passed away, and spent a lot of time with my friends out there. But I also knew practitioners, wellness practitioners that I worked with quite closely. There was actually a Chinese medicine doctor that I worked with, and she helped me with took care of me in terms of having acupuncture and all of that. So I had a really open mind when it came to trying things. And really what I was trying to move through was just the physical and the emotional and the mental manifestations of grief. I would say what I have learned is that it's better to allow your feelings and your emotions to come up and let them clear out, rather than trying to stuff them down. I went through a period of time in the early days where I just was trying to numb myself. So I wasn't, by no stretch of the imagination was I perfect. So I had some nights where I would go to bed with a bottle of wine and chocolate, and I was just trying to cope with what I was experiencing. And then thankfully I didn't stay in that space very long. I figured that I needed to just find a way to process through as best as I can. And I think everybody's journey is so different. I think it's so important to really honor where you're at. It depends on your relationship with the person who passed away. It depends on how they passed away. I think with Kim, the thing that was always very hard for me was that it was so sudden. And we had that day that he passed away, I was overseeing a show that I was producing. And so I left him about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I left to go to the theater. I took the Dundas streetcar to the theater, and we had made plans to actually, meet up at home, watch some Jon Stewart, have a bagel, really basic couple things that I'm sure every couple has, these weird little traditions. And so that was what we were going to do. And he was going to actually meet a friend of his at a hotel downtown for a drink, somebody who was visiting from out of town. And so normally we would, if we weren't together, we would have sent each other a text, we would have checked in, but we didn't check in with each other that night because I thought he was with his friend, and I had no idea that he hadn't actually even left our house. So when I came home and found him, it was quite a shock. And I think that was the hardest part, was not being able to say goodbye and having all these questions in my own mind of, what happened? Were there signs that there was something wrong with him? Could we have somehow have prevented what happened? But it actually does no good to go into these conversations of what if and what did I mess up, because it actually ends up just being a downward spiral. So thankfully, I had really good friends in my life who helped me to move through those questions and just accept that what happened happened, and I needed to just process my feelings and my grief and find a way to get on with my life. And one of the things that I did promise myself was on the day of his funeral, I promised myself that I was going to try and find out what happened to him exactly. And that sort of desire is what eventually led me to go back to school for health coaching and for nutrition. And that's why I'm so passionate about health. That's why I do what I do for a living, because I want to help people stay healthy for as long as possible. So just going back to this whole idea of like, it really depends on what your relationship is with the person who passed, because for me, Kim was my primary relationship. He was my husband. And so because we were so close, that bond, when it got broken, at least in the physical realm, it was a really, really hard thing. But every loss is different. So it depends on what your relationship is with the person who passed, how close you were, and how they passed away. Like if someone's sick, there's a little bit more time, but it's also painful to witness someone that you love getting sicker and sicker, and eventually not the person that you remember them to be. So in terms of grief, I had my tools, and my tools were meditation and therapy and lots of bubble baths and lots of solitude. Like I needed to have time. I spent time with friends, but I also spent a lot of time by myself. And so I needed all of those things to help me move through. And with each passing in the first year, they talk about the year of first. So that first year, the year of first, it was very difficult because I had to just accept, birthdays, Valentine's Day, our anniversary, his birthday, Christmas, all these things. I had to accept life without him there. And then the second year, actually, in a lot of ways, was a lot harder because some of the friends that were around in my life the first few months after he passed away, they kind of disappeared. And that's what happens sometimes with relationships when you're going through grief, is not everybody sticks around, and that's okay, because in a way they helped me to kind of process through things easier, because I didn't have to have all these people to worry about and take care of and check in with. So those were my particular tools, but I think everybody's kind of has to figure out for themselves like what works well for them. So, my personal tool was meditation and, having solitude, but for other people, it might be better to be in the company of people. And it also depends on what you have access to. Like, I think having a therapist and being able to actually talk through my grief really, really helped. And so my hope is that everyone has that kind of access, that if they wanted to use it, they have that. And also the support groups. I personally didn't use a support group, but if you have access to a support group, it's really amazing. So, I would say that I have learned a lot of lessons through grief. And the first lesson that I really learned was that I realized how deeply I loved my husband, and having him suddenly gone just made me appreciate who he was and the relationship that we had together. And in a way, it actually made it more painful, because I realized after the fact of how much and how deeply I loved him. Over time, grief has also taught me to appreciate life, because I've realized, because I've had other people in my life pass since his passing, and I've realized that none of us are promised tomorrow. So it has really given me the motivation to be focused and to appreciate life and to appreciate the people in my life and to do the things that I want to do, because Kim worked hard, but he kept putting things off. He kept a lot of times for work, he'd have to go to Europe or New York or someplace like that. And I would say, well, why don't I come along? Why don't we just make a weekend of it? Why don't we stay a couple extra days? And he would always be in a rush to come back because he's like, oh, I got too much work to do. I have this deadline and that deadline. And so he worked really, really hard, but I felt like he never really got to enjoy his life. And so I've learned in the years after his passing to really take time to celebrate and to enjoy every single day, to try and find joy in every single day. In fact, actually, about a year and a half, maybe actually close to 2 years ago, I started a daily gratitude practice. And I started that practice because one of the things that I noticed after Kim passed away was that I went into such a dark place after his death. There were times when I was pretty suicidal and I had to ask for help. And I found that even after, say, 5 years or 6 years after his death, I was still having a hard time. Like, I just found that when things didn't go as I expected, I just went into a dark place quickly. And so one of my therapists had suggested that I do a gratitude practice. And so a couple of years ago, I started doing exactly that. Every morning I get up, I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for and kind of what I hope will happen over the course of the day. And then at the end of the day, I write down what happened in the day that I'm grateful for. And it's such a simple practice, but there's a lot of really good science behind it, because what it has allowed my brain to do is rewire itself. So when things do go wrong, I don't get depressed, and I'm able to sort of pick myself up a lot more easily than before. And so it's been a practice that I've been using regularly for 2 years. It's definitely something that I recommend that everyone get into. And I know that initially, when you're first adjusting to life without your loved one, it's very hard to do these kinds of wellness and self-care practices. Like, I had to take a little bit of a break from my meditation. It took me like a good couple of weeks before I could get back to sitting and breathing and trying to get present in my body. But anyway, that has been a really, really good tool as well. In terms of the other things that I think are really helpful it's really helpful to actually take care of yourself, even though you're not motivated to. Like, I wasn't motivated to take care of myself, but I knew that if I stayed on top of my nutrition, that it would actually be better for my body rather than trying to drink too much or overeat and all those things. Even though, like, I did have those moments at the beginning of my grief journey. And with every passing year, it's a little bit different, right? I wake up every single day. I still think of him in various ways, but I'm in a new relationship. We live together, we have a life together, and I still think of Kim every single day. I appreciate the time that we had together. It used to be when I thought of him, it was just painful and I would burst into tears. Now, when I think of him, I just celebrate the fact that I had an opportunity to be with somebody for 11 years who was so kind and generous and such a sweet, gentle soul. He really has made a big impact in my life. And he reminds me to continue to be kind and generous and to give of my energy wherever I can and to help as many people as possible. And I think in his passing, that's been one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. So everybody's journey is so, so unique. I would encourage you to just honor where you're at and trust your intuition and look for guidance, look for signs. I have so many signs in my life that still remind me of Kim and allow him to, in a way, he's always going to walk with me until my final days. So I thank you so much for listening. I hope my words have offered some kind of solace and encouragement. Thank you.